Alrighty, so we're here to discuss the best-selling book in America, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. It is a truly awful book on every level. I'm going to go through it in detail with you. We're going to problem spot it and note that basically it's just a cult manual. It really is a cult manual. We'll get to all of that in just a second. First, just want to let you know that this video and videos like it are brought to you by our sponsors over at Raycon. They are indeed spectacular. Go get yourself a pair of Raycons today so you can listen to content like this. Alrighty, so let's talk about this truly awful cult book. It is a cult book. Okay, the only way to describe White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo is that this is basically a book by a cult leader who is going to cleanse you of your thetans, your racist thetans. You have all of these racist thetans. They've clogged up your soul. And they were put into a volcano long ago, and now they've exploded. They've coated your soul. The only way to get rid of the racist thetans is to let Robin DiAngelo educate you in your racism you didn't even know that you had. If you deny that you have it, you're even more racist than you were before. The book is just loaded with problems. It is absolutely insane. I mean, it's an insane book. There are a bunch of folks who are liberal, by the way, who have reviewed this book and found it to be completely insane because you don't actually have to be conservative to spot absolute bullcrap when you see it. And this book is just that. I broke it down into 7 categories of suckiness. So there are 7 categories that really kind of this book breaks down into. They are historical nonsense. So her take on American history is just obscenely ridiculous. And then there is her bizarre redefinition of racism. So she redefines the term racism to mean this thing out there that she can label you with, even though you know you're not a racist. And then there is a 3rd category of stupidity, and that is ripping on American systems. So all systems of America are inherently bad. It must be ripped down to the ground. Then there is the 4th problem, which is the arrogance of white centrality. The idea that the only voices that matter in America are voices like Robin DiAngelo's. Only white woke leftists like Robin DiAngelo matter because she is better than you. She has more moral authority. She's a better white person than you if you're white. And she is more intelligent than you if you are black. And you require her as a white savior in order to fix your life if you're a black person. I mean, she's fairly explicit about a lot of this stuff in the book. 5th problem, she treats black people as absolute tokens. She does not treat them as fellow human beings who think and act like normal human beings. She treats them as sort of an exotic other who react in bizarre ways that only Robin DiAngelo sees. It's very weird. You get to the biggest problem of all is the unfalsifiability of it, the cultish nonsense of it. And this is, I mean, if she could have you at a resort in Latin America drinking Kool-Aid, she would. Robin DiAngelo. The unfalsifiability and the cultish insanity of this book are beyond the pale. And then finally, the insane examples. That's my favorite part. She has a bunch of kind of personal stories of stuff she's done in her diversity training. She gets paid tens of thousands of dollars to lecture woke white people at companies and supposedly make them less racist. But it's weird because when she walks away, people seem to be more pissed off than they were before she came. But that's just a sign of their own white fragility and defensiveness. So we'll get to all of those things. Okay, so let us begin at the beginning with her take on American history. Now, as I've said before, there are really, really a lot of bad things in American history. And you don't have to make light of bad things in American history in order to still say that America is an incredible nation with tremendous founding principles that we failed to live up to. And the story of America is getting better over time and broadening the rights guaranteed in the founding to more and more people over time in consonance with universal principles. Right? You don't have to whitewash any of American history in order to say that. According to Robin DiAngelo, however, American history really did not exist up until Robin DiAngelo wrote this book. And her take on American history is so bizarre. It's completely disconnected. So I'll give you an example. She says in this book, quote, women were denied the right to vote until 1920. Black women were denied access to that right until 1965. So if you just read that, you would think that black women were denied the vote until 1965. That's not true. Black women were given the vote at the same time that white women were given the vote, namely in 1920. Now, it did require the Voting Rights Act to ensure that black Americans were given access to the ballot box, but she says this like 3 or 4 different times, this 1965 idea that black women were not allowed to vote until no, black Americans were basically discriminated against until the end of Jim Crow. Okay, that's a minor example. She also gives the example of Jackie Robinson. She suggests that the way we learn history in America is deeply wrong because we learn things like black people who are successful are outliers. So Jackie Robinson, the only reason he made the major leagues is because he was the only black player deserving of reaching the major leagues. There's not a single fan of baseball who has ever thought that. Like literally not a single fan. What made Jackie Robinson historic is that he was the first black ball player, not that he was the first good black ball player. I feel like most baseball fans are fairly well aware of this thing called the Negro Leagues, where there were lots of great players, like Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige. Like we were all pretty much aware of that, but she has to rewrite history such that all white people everywhere are bad and also apparently incredibly stupid. Again, those are the mild examples. Listen to how she characterizes America's history. Quote, in some ways, racism's adaptations over time are more sinister than concrete rules such as Jim Crow. The adaptations produce the same outcome. People of color are blocked from moving forward, but have been put in place by a dominant white society that won't or can't admit to its beliefs. She is literally saying that the racist adaptations in American life are worse since the Civil Rights Act than the regime of Jim Crow. You have to be a patently insane person to believe this. Given the advancements that black Americans have made since the end of Jim Crow, the growth of the black middle class, the increase in black college graduates, I mean, given the fact that you don't have legal barriers to entry in the United States anymore, to suggest that informal structures of racism are more damaging to black Americans than, legalized structures of racism in the United States is perfectly insane. This may be my favorite ahistorical quote. This is just, again, taking the narrative that you see so often in sort of the New York Times op-ed page where you pick a bad thing that happened in 1783 and then you go, and it's just the same today, and you just miss all the intervening history. This quote is a real charmer. Quote, "There is a curious satisfaction in the punishment of black people. The smiling faces of the white crowd picnicking at lynchings in past, and the satisfied approval of white people observing mass incarceration and execution in the present." So she's literally saying that white people today who look at the prison system are exactly the same types of people who attended lynchings as a party in 1920, which is crazy. And there's no other word for that. That'd be crazy. That is nuts. That is nuttiness on a very high level. That is just crazy. Because she's a crazy person. Okay, so that is point number one, is her crazy view of American history. And this, again, is tied into her crazy definition of American racism. So this gets us to point number two. So normally we define racism as discrimination against someone based on race, correct? Wouldn't that be the simple definition of racism? Racism is when I treat you differently based on your race, because I have a bad perception of you because of your race. Right? That is the definition of racism, but not according to Robin DiAngelo. Racism is far more than that. Racism is in the air. Racism surrounds us. It binds us. It holds the galaxy together. Right? She's the Yoda of racism. It's the Force. That's all it is. Quote, "Everyone has prejudices and discriminates, but structures of oppression go well beyond individuals. While women could be prejudiced and discriminate against men in individual interactions, women as a group could not deny men their civil rights." So one of the key aspects of racism, according to Robin DiAngelo, is that racism, and this is a trope on the left, is that discrimination, it's not just discrimination and prejudice. It is discrimination and prejudice baked into systems of power, into hierarchies of power. So, sure, a black person could discriminate against a white person, but the black person has no power. So you're assuming this is perfectly circular. America is discriminatory, right? And the proof that America is discriminatory is that America is discriminatory. That is the proof that America is discriminatory, is that America is discriminatory. So it is an identity. She's basically saying that America is discriminatory because of white people. And if you point to other people who discriminate, they don't count because America is discriminatory because of white people. And that is the logic that she is using here. So this leads her to insane contentions like this one. Whites hold the social and institutional positions in society to infuse their racial prejudice into the laws, policies, practices, and norms of a society in a way that people of color do not. Okay, now, that may have been true in 1960. That is certainly not true today, right? Listen to the rest of this quote. "A person of color may refuse to wait on me if I enter a shop, but people of color cannot pass legislation that prohibits me and everyone like me from buying a home in a certain neighborhood. That is literally forbidden by federal law. A white person cannot pass that legislation either. It is barred by federal law. It was made illegal in the Fair Housing Act of 1968, guys. It's been legal for a really long time. And then there are a bunch of acts that were designed to actually end redlining, things like the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977. Like, there's plenty of legislation on this. Has been illegal for a long time, but because she's ignorant, she says this kind of stuff. Okay, then she gets to this. So again, she's trying to redefine racism so that whiteness is the problem. She says the racial ideology that circulates in the United States rationalizes racial hierarchies as the outcome of a natural order resulting from either genetics or individual effort or talent. Ideologies that obscure racism as a system of inequality are perhaps the most powerful racial forces, because once we accept our positions within racial hierarchies, those positions seem natural and difficult to question, even when we are disadvantaged by them. So what she's suggesting here is that if you believe in a meritocracy, or that individuals are responsible for their decisions, this is an aspect of tacit racism, right? Racism has now been broadened out. You don't have to be personally, she says this over and over, you don't have to be personally racist or have done a racist thing in order for you to be racist, as part of a broader racist system because you are defined by race. In order for her to accomplish this idea that only white people have power in the United States, which again is an insanity just beyond pale, she says this. This is crazy, right? Quote, although rare individual people of color may be inside the circles of power, Colin Powell, Clarence Thomas, Marco Rubio, Barack Obama, they support the status quo and do not challenge racism in any way significant enough to be threatening. Did you know that? Did you know that Barack Obama just supported the status quo and didn't challenge racism ever? Were you aware of this? You white woke liberals, you? She says to say that whiteness is a standpoint is to say that a significant aspect of white identity is to see oneself as an individual outside or innocent of race, just human. In other words, if you're a white person, you say, I'm just human, or I'm just an individual. And I'm not thinking of myself as in terms of a white person. That just demonstrates how white you are. Whiteness is unfalsifiable. It is undeniable. You are defined by your whiteness because Robin DiAngelo says you are. Okay, so that is problem number 2, is the bizarre redefinition of racism, in which racism is institutional structures. It has nothing to do with you personally, except that you're guilty for all of it. Okay, this brings us to point number 3 that Robin DiAngelo makes. Okay, and that is that American systems suck. America sucks. This is a real point, right? It's really a Marxist critique, is that America, the 1619 Project, as it says, rooted in evil, racism, bigotry, white supremacy. And the real indicators of bigotry and white supremacy today are things like belief in individualism. If you believe that individuals are responsible for their decision-making, and you don't blame racism for all inequality of outcome, that means you're a racist. So if you look at 2 people and they have unequal outcomes, and you don't say, oh, that was discrimination or racism, it's because you're a racist in some way. Right? She quotes Ibram Kendi to this effect. She says, Kendi goes on to argue that if we truly believe that all humans are equal, disparity in condition can only be the result of systemic discrimination. Okay, that again is a crazy contention. No 2 human beings on planet Earth have the same conditions, the same living conditions. Children within the same household have different living conditions. Is that the result of systemic discrimination? To view human beings this way is completely ascientific and bizarre. But individualism is the real enemy here. Because if you see somebody else as an individual along the lines that Martin Luther King Jr. espoused, you're actually promoting racism, is what she says. Because individualism suggests that you're responsible for your own actions, which means that maybe if you fail, it's not everybody else's fault. And the precondition of racism is that it is everybody else's fault, it's the society's fault. And if you fail to recognize this, then you are a racist. So she says this: individualism claims that there are no intrinsic barriers to individual success, and that failure is not a consequence of social structures, but comes from individual character. According to the ideology of individualism, race is irrelevant. Regardless of our protestations that social groups don't matter and that we see everyone as equal, we know that to be a man as defined by the dominant culture is a different experience than being a woman. These groups matter, but they don't matter naturally as we are often taught to believe. Rather, we are taught that they matter, and the social meaning ascribed to these groups creates a difference in lived experience. Okay, so now she's even contradicting herself. This isn't even internally coherent, right? She's suggesting that individualism is bad because you might blame people for their social condition and not the system, right? You might blame people based on the fact that they are individuals. But also, these social conditions are figments of the imagination. So which is it? Is race real or is race not real? If race is not real, then perhaps the way we overcome racism is by focusing in on the individual. But no, you can't focus in on the individual because then you won't blame racism. Right? So it contradicts itself here. And she just blithely moves past that. Right? We're all individuals, and race isn't real, except that race is super real and defines all of our interactions. But we can't overcome that by teaching people to think as individuals, so we have to buy into the fake concept of race in order to get past racism. Square that circle, if you can. Okay, the next idiotic point in this ridiculous, stupid book, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. We've gone through 3 already. The historical nonsense, the bizarre redefinition of racism, where racism is everything and all things, ripping on American systems like individualism and meritocracy. She says objectivity is also an aspect of racism. If you say you're objective about an issue, you can't be objective because your race defines you. So she's going to have to explain that to the scientific method. And by the way, it's also undeniable, right? If you deny any of this, if you have a positive self-image, then this, as a white person, this means that you are a racist. So you're not even allowed to protest, I'm not a racist. It's pretty amazing. She says, denying that we have few cross-racial relationships by proclaiming how diverse our community or workplace is, or attributing inequality between whites and people of color to causes other than racism, is enacting racism. Racism is everything, and it's undeniable. And if you give alternative explanations for disparities, that's because you're a racist. Alrighty, folks, we'll get back to this in just a second. I got to tell you about Raycon. Raycon makes fantastic, fantastic earbuds. One of the reasons they are so terrific is they come with a variety of fits just for your ear. So unlike a lot of other wireless earbuds, you know, the ones that are sort of one size fits all, these ones come with an actual card that has a variety of fits that come with it, so you can actually customize that. Check this out. It just flew into me. It just flew into me. If you actually take a look at the Raycon wireless earbuds, they come along with this right here, right? A variety of fits. You can actually customize it so it fits your ear absolutely perfectly. Also, it comes in a variety of colors, a variety of styles, so they're really cool. Go check out the Raycons right now. They are the best wireless earbuds on the market, and they sound just as good as all the other earbuds, and they start at half the price. Plus, you get 15% off your order today from the everyday E25 earbuds. Those are the best model yet. 6 hours of playtime, seamless Bluetooth pairing, more bass, more compact design that gives you that nice noise isolating fit. Every single day, I pop these babies out, pop them in my ears. I spend half the day with Raycons in my ears, specifically because I'm listening to so much content. I know you are too these days. Again, head on over to buyraycon.com/ShapiroYT. That's buyraycon.com/ShapiroYT. Click the link in the description below to get 15% off your order. Again, go ahead and get 15% off your order by clicking on that description in the link below. I know that you will enjoy your Raycons as much as I do. Okay, this brings us to our fourth point, her own arrogance, the arrogance of white centrality. The only people who matter on planet Earth are white woke leftists. They are the only people who matter. They are the greatest human beings who have ever been created, these white woke leftists. They are here to chide other people who are white for not being sufficiently woke, and they are here to take care of all of the poor black people who require the help of Robin DiAngelo and have no autonomy of their own and have no agency of their own. I mean, she really deprives black people of agency in this book. It's incredibly racist. So she says stuff like this, quote, "In speaking as a white person to a primarily white audience, I am yet again centering white people and the white voice. I have not found a way around this dilemma. Though I am centering the white voice, I am also using my insider status to challenge racism. To not use my position this way is to uphold racism, and that is unacceptable." She's the start of the story. She's the end of the story. She's the only person who matters in the story. Racism is because of white people, which means that only white people have the power to help black people, which means only Robin DiAngelo matters. And this is how you end up with that amazing clip of the white woman yelling at a black police officer and saying that she has something to say about racism, but the black police officer doesn't really have anything to say about racism.
When you take off your uniform, are you afraid of police?
I have a question for you. You're white and you're telling this to two black police officers.
Yeah.
Do you see the problem with that a little bit?
No, I don't, because you know what? Just because I'm white and I haven't experienced racism myself doesn't mean I can't fight for justice. They're a part of the system. They're a part of the problem. Just because they're black doesn't mean they're not a part of the problem.
She says, quote, "I believe that white progressives cause the most daily damage to people of color. I define a white progressive as any white person who thinks he or she is not racist, or is less racist, or in the choir, or already gets it." By the way, she does not count herself as a white progressive, right? Obviously, she gets it, but not you. You don't get it, even if you say you get it. If you say you get it, you're a white progressive, and you are the biggest problem, not a problem for black people, the biggest problem for black people, according to Robin DiAngelo, which is, again, the most patronizing, ridiculous angle toward black people ever. She says, "White progressives can be the most difficult for people of color because, to the degree we think we have arrived, we will put our energy into making sure that others see us as having arrived." Okay, that's unfalsifiable, insane nonsense. The only way you know you're a racist is if you think you are not. So if you say I'm not a racist, you're a racist. And if you say you are a racist, you are also a racist. So the witch sinks or floats, doesn't matter. The witch dies, right? That's the way this works. If you say I'm not a racist, and I read Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, you are demonstrating white fragility. Also, if you are a racist, at least you're acknowledging that you're a racist, which means that maybe you're not a racist, but you just admitted you're a racist, so you're kind of a racist. She does this routine where she suggests that you can't talk to black people about racism, but also, unless you ask a black person about racism, you're doing it wrong. So she says at one point, "The expectation that people of color should teach white people about racism is another aspect of white racial innocence that reinforces several problematic racial assumptions." Like, why haven't we sought out information on this before this conversation? So basically she says, you don't know anything about racism because you're white, right? Your own whiteness prevents you from seeing race properly. And also you can't ask a black person about racism because that would be assuming that they speak for all black people. So there's only one person you can ask about racism, ironically enough. Who could it possibly be? Who could you possibly go to as your guide? Oh, yeah, Robin DiAngelo. You could pay her some money for diversity training. Okay, this brings us to point number 5, and that is treating black people as tokens. I've mentioned this already. Treating black people as completely ineffective, as unable to control their own lives. The way she talks about black people is insane. I mean, totally crazy. She says, quote, "Our simplistic definition of racism as intentional acts of racial discrimination committed by immoral individuals engenders a confidence that we are not part of the problem and that our learning is thus complete. The claims we offer up as evidence are implausible. For example, perhaps you've heard someone say, 'I was taught to treat everyone the same,' or 'people just need to be taught to respect one another, and that begins in the home.' These statements are unconvincing to most people of color and only invalidate their experiences. Apparently, if you say to a black person, 'I was taught to treat everyone the same,' black people look at you cross-eyed, apparently. Apparently, no black person has ever been taught in their home to treat people the same, or that people need to respect each other. I have a feeling that's not true. I have a feeling lots and lots of black people across America teach their children in their home to respect each other in the home and beyond. But according to Robin DiAngelo, no black person's ever been taught that. And if you say that, then obviously black people will look at you as though you're crazy. This is how she thinks of black people. She's talking about white tears, okay, and white women's tears. She suggests that white women's tears are dangerous. White women's tears are dangerous. Why are white women's tears dangerous? Because in the past, if a white woman cried, maybe she was crying because she was falsely accusing a black man of rape, like the Emmett Till case, or a sexual assault, like the Emmett Till case. And then maybe the black person will be victimized because the white lady's crying. Okay, I'm not kidding. This is what she says in her book. Quote, as the meeting started, I told my fellow white participants that if they felt moved to tears, they should please leave the room. I would go with them for support, but I asked that they not cry in the mixed group. After the discussion, I spent the next hour explaining to a very outraged white woman why she was asked not to cry in the presence of the people of color. There is a long historical backdrop of black men being tortured and murdered because of a white woman's distress, and we white women bring these histories with us. Our tears trigger the terrorism of this history, particularly for African Americans. Has she met a black person? How many black people, when they see a white woman crying, go, oh my God, I'm about to be lynched? How many? Seriously, like any? Like what? Does she know black people? Robin DiAngelo, this is crazy talk. She says she herself about her own crying. She says she cries in these sessions. But quote, I try to cry quietly so I don't take up more space. And if people rush to comfort me, I do not accept the comfort. I let them know I am fine so we can move on. By the way, she says that if men of color try to help white women, they may be driven by their conditioning. So if you're a black person who tries to help a white woman, it's because you have integrated into your own life the white supremacy. Quote, men of color may also come to the aid of white women in these exchanges and may also be driven by their conditioning under sexism and patriarchy. Right? They've internalized the patriarchy and maybe they're acting from sexism. Wow. I mean, like, this is crazy. By the way, she also suggests that if you have a black friend and you're not talking with your black friend about race, maybe your friendship isn't real. Like, all she is there to do, Robin DiAngelo, is make race relations worse, I think. All she does is go into rooms. Like, imagine how black people feel when, like, you're in a room at a diversity training, and Robin DiAngelo turns to all the white people and says, do not cry in front of those black people. Don't do it. Don't cry in front of those black people, because if you cry in front of those black people, they're going to feel like you're going to lynch them. As a black person, does that make you feel more or less comfortable? Like, what in the actual hell? I'm not making this up, guys. This is in the best-selling book in America, featured on Jimmy Fallon. Okay, then we get to the sixth problem, the unfalsifiability and the cultish nonsense. The more that you deny the insanity of Robin DiAngelo, the more you suffer from white fragility. It's incredible. The more you dissent from her point of view, that just indicates that you are suffering from white fragility, right? This is catch-22. If you are healthy enough to not want to fly, then that means that you're healthy enough to fly. And if you're crazy enough to want to fly, then that means that we should let you fly, right? It's catch-22. It's just, no matter how you do this, this is where you end up. Okay, unfalsifiability and cultish nonsense. And it's just insane. I mean, it's throughout the book. Quote, the white fragility is triggered by discomfort and anxiety. It is born of superiority and entitlement. In fact, it is a powerful means of white racial control and the protection of white advantage. So if you're white, you're part of a racist system. If you feel discomfort and anxiety because someone's calling you a racist, that's because you are a racist. Quote, how can I say that if you are white, your opinions on racism are most likely ignorant when I don't even know you? I can say so because nothing in mainstream US culture gives us the information we need to have the nuanced understanding of arguably the most complex and enduring social dynamic of the last several hundred years. So again, the cult leader will inform you of the fascinating details of white privilege. She says, in fact, when we try to talk openly and honestly about race, white fragility emerges as we are so often met with silence, defensiveness, argumentation, certitude, and other forms of pushback. These are not natural responses. They are social forces that prevent us from attaining the racial knowledge we need. So if she says something crazy and you say, that sounds like bullshit to me. If that happens, then you are just, that's not you, and it's not that she's spouting bullshit. It's that there are social forces preventing us from attaining the racial knowledge we need. All you have to do is take these clear lessons and we can cleanse the thetans from you. It's social forces acting upon you. What are these forces? They include the ideologies of individualism and meritocracy, narrow and repetitive media representations of people of color, depictions of whiteness as the human ideal, white solidarity. She talks about if you lack racial humility and you are unwilling to listen, or if you want to get to solutions, or if you want to focus on intentions over impact, meaning that you actually want intent of racism as opposed to just evidence of inequality, all of this is racism. She says that if you claim you are colorblind, or if you color celebrate, right? If you say that you're married to a black person, or you have lots of black friends, or you marched for civil rights in the 60s, all of that's bad because it takes race off the table and close rather than open any further exploration. She says that respect, assumption of good intentions, and refusing to make assumptions are all called out as signs of white fragility. Okay, basically, bottom line is, no matter what you do, you're a racist unless Robin DiAngelo gives you the clean bill of health. And then she gives crazy examples of her philosophy in action. And this is the most fun part. Quote, consider a conversation I had with a white friend. She was telling me about a white couple she knew who had just moved to New Orleans and bought a house for a mere $25,000. Of course, she immediately added, they also had to buy a gun, and Joan is afraid to leave the house. I immediately knew they had bought a home in a black neighborhood. Who is the racist here, exactly, Robin DiAngelo? Why is it that you immediately go to, it must be a black neighborhood? And why is it that even if it is a majority black neighborhood, that is the deciding feature? Why is your immediate assumption that the person doesn't want to live there because it's filled with black people, as opposed to what they are saying, I don't want to live there because it's filled with crime? I mean, that's like overtly racist stuff there from Robin DiAngelo, and she's proclaiming that this is because of her own wokeness. Another great example. To illustrate an early lesson in white racial framing, imagine that a white mother and her white child are in the grocery store. The child sees a black man and shouts out, Mommy, that man's skin is black. Several people, including the black man, turn to look. How do you imagine the mother would respond? Most people would immediately put their finger to their mouth and say, shush. When white people are asked what the mother might be feeling, most agree she is likely to feel anxiety, tension, and embarrassment. Indeed, many of us have had similar experiences wherein the message was clear, we should not talk openly about race. Now imagine the child had shouted out how handsome the man was or how strong. These statements would probably be met with chuckles and smiles. The child would not likely be shushed because we consider these statements compliments. Okay, question. Isn't the real reason that the white woman is saying shush to the child because she is afraid that she is going to offend the black guy? Isn't that the real reason that she is saying shush to the child? Okay, it's not because she thinks that black is a diss. It is because she is afraid the black man will be offended by the fact that the child is pointing out race. Okay, and maybe she's afraid of that because people like Robin DiAngelo are going around saying that black people are easily triggered by everything on earth, apparently, and they need Robin DiAngelo's specific protection. Maybe the mother is being oversensitive because she has been trained to be oversensitive by people like Robin DiAngelo. Is that possible? No, it has to be that the white mother is experiencing racism. Okay, here's another great story. Okay, so there's a teacher, and the teacher said to a couple of girls, one was white and one was black. They finished a phrase with, "You should do this, girl," and the black girl got very offended, very, very offended. And this ended with like actual litigation. And so Robin DiAngelo was brought in to fix it. She said, these white teachers' responses illustrate several dynamics of white fragility. So what happened is the white girl said, well, the teacher calls everybody girl. Like she calls me girl. She called the black girl girl. Right? There's nothing offensive about that. She calls everybody girl. In the same way that my father will very often call people sweetheart. He does this all the time, right? It doesn't mean, he doesn't direct it at women of a particular age or a particular creed, right? It's just an endearment, right? The same thing happens here, where the teacher calls everybody girl, and the black girl gets offended. And then the teacher says, I don't understand why people are getting offended. Literally, I call this to everybody. Here's Robin DiAngelo's take. These white teachers' responses illustrate several dynamics of white fragility. They were unable to separate intentions from impact, despite the teacher's lack of cross-racial skills and understanding, a lack that led to a racial violation with potential legal repercussions. He arrogantly remained confident that he was right and that the student was wrong. See, as soon as you protest your innocence, as soon as you say, I wasn't saying anything racist. In fact, that's a word I use with everybody. Now you're suffering from white fragility because you have made your intent the question here. Okay, if all of this sounds like a cult, that's because it is a cult. The Robin DiAngelo white fragility cult is a cult. And the only way to become an initiate into the cult is to buy into everything that Robin DiAngelo says, to buy her book, to buy her diversity program, and then to browbeat yourself until you reach the final level of the cult. Right? The final level of the cult is where you just become a walking, spouting Robin DiAngelo lecturing black police officers about the white legacy of racism in the United States. This is all crazy. It's all nuts. And the fact that it's the #1 best-selling book in America says a lot about where we are in this moment. It is not good for the country. It makes the country significantly, significantly worse. Do not buy this book. I bought it for you just so you would not have to read it. Do not give this grifter your money. Don't do it. But if you want to buy the rejoinder to this book, if you want to recognize what it is that is being destroyed, why the greatest system in human history is being destroyed, the philosophy, culture, the history of the United States, why all of these things are being destroyed by Robin DiAngelo, buy my book instead. July 21st, it comes out, How to Destroy America in 3 Easy Steps. Never has been more relevant. It is, I think, the end of the story in terms of rebutting a lot of this nonsense. It'll certainly help you around the water cooler, and it'll remind you of why America is such a great and good country. How to Destroy America in 3 Easy Steps. Go check it out right now. That's all I got to say on white fragility. I feel like it's plenty. If you liked this content and you would enjoy seeing more like it, make sure that you like this video and then comment below.